All right, welcome to Scary Ideas, episode 19. On this podcast, we cover topics that most people are not comfortable talking about. On this episode, we have a special guest. They're a comedian from a place called New York City, who I first met here in Chicago. Very happy to have him on, so let's welcome to the show, William Beteet III. And here he is. How's it going, man?
How's it going? Thanks for having me, bro.
No problem. First, to get this out of the way, what are your pronouns?
He.
He, him. All right. I just wanted to keep it gender neutral because this is a very liberal city that this is being broadcasted to. I'm totally kidding. This is going on the internet. I don't care. I don't give a fuck about the locality that it's broadcasted from. So how you doing? How's being a big shot in New York?
It's going pretty good, man. Life is good. I'm actually moving to France in like 2 weeks. So.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. I heard about that from Clay.
Yeah. Shout out Clay.
Shout out to Clay.
Life's been good, man. Loving it.
So when I first met you, you were kind of like, would you use the term beta male?
I would say, yeah, I was going through a transitionary period.
Oh, okay. Also, probably just because I just thought of you as that because you were starting out as stand-up, and everyone starts out, as a beta.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a way that you can really respect yourself and bomb as much as you do when you first start comedy. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, it attacks your self-concept.
Okay, because I'm not trying to be disparaging. It's just that right now you seem like you subscribe to the alpha mentality in many ways.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate you.
I just brought up this topic because I'm learning that there's more than just alpha, beta. There's also gamma, omega, and that's the only ones I care about. There's like another one, but I listen to Owen Benjamin a lot, and this dude loves calling people gamma males to the point where it's just fucking, he loses all meaning. Basically, anyone he disagrees with, he's like, get out of here, gamma. How do you feel about this whole situation with men and like weak men and, Jordan Peterson?
Well, I love Jordan. So my whole thing is I'm actually a real big fan of weak men, because then I don't have to be as strong, right? I think that I use the term beta a lot more. When I was more beta, it's actually funny. Like, but I think about it now and I'm like, yeah, man, I'm actually kind of cool with all these soy boys. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just makes it easier to be like dominant in a situation, rather than having to stab people and fight them.
Yeah, soy boys is another term that I like to throw around to describe, mostly men who are technically men. They're shaped like, they have XY chromosomes.
They got them tits.
That's it, though. Other than that, they're just fucking pasty, weak pieces of multicellular organisms.
Yeah, well, it's crazy that, like, now more men are not fucking than ever. I think they polled and it's like 30% under men under 30s in America haven't had sex in the last year.
What a bunch
And that number's probably a lot higher because men lie about that shit.
Shit, dude. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I got laid when I was like 16, and I bragged about it to everybody. No, I don't know. If you're in your 30s and haven't had sex, that's fine. But if you're in your 30s and complaining about how you need basic universal income, should we get into that?
Oh, yeah, dude. I'm a big proponent of UBI, man.
Really?
Yeah, I love that shit.
So you're pro people leeching off the system.
Most definitely, man.
What about billionaires? Do you like them?
I'm not like against them. I'm not like one of these Bernie guys where it's like I hate billionaires. It's just I think we need to find a easier, more effective way of basically getting money from people, and I think that's per transaction.
Hmm.
Um, Levied against luxury items and B2B transactions.
Oh, okay. So just higher taxes.
So value added tax levied on business to business transactions while also having it be for a graduated value added tax for luxury items. So let's say for you and I, maybe we pay like 5% for some bananas, whereas if someone's buying a $60,000 Rolex, that might be 30 to 40%.
Mm.
And since this is not, they can't do some weird tax exemption or anything like that, or it's not going to be hidden in capital gains. It's a lot more effective way of being able to basically have that money be captured for our economy.
Okay, so just a fancy way of saying, yeah, okay, I guess that makes some sense. So you just want to make it more fair if you have luxury items. So that's
Well, yeah, well, and also that way it just keeps well, it taxes the right people, right? And if you can afford those luxury items, just you can spread that money around a little bit, and that creates more consumers, and it keeps people from rioting.
rioting.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, and what about so if we have UBI, doesn't that just make it so everything adjusts accordingly? And if you have $1,000, doesn't that mean prices will just go up?
So the cool thing about America is the American economy is so vast that largely what it will do is it'll dissipate. People are just going to spend it on various different things. And so nobody's going to be actually spending on the same things. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, oh, then rent's going to go up. Well, the thing is we live in a massive country. So rent all of a sudden starts going up in certain areas by a lot. People can just move because they have $1,000 a month. So they get that mobility. And, yeah, so no two things that people are going to spend it on are the same. And the most inflationary things in the American economy are healthcare and education.
Mm-hmm. So not just everything else, not like groceries, not.
Those things are going right at the rate that the Federal Reserve wants them to be at. Whereas education is becoming it's increased by 100 or 200%. And that's really not going to be affected by UBI. Same with healthcare. And that's because those are artificially pushed up by loan agreements that the government has worked out or like payment pacts.
Well, I guess that sounds smarter than what I mean, I guess I can't answer. I have no fucking defense to that because I don't really get it that much. It just seems like common sense that if we just give people money, everyone has the same amount. Just mad, like if everyone just has the same amount of basic income, how could that not increase prices in the marketplace? I don't know.
Well, but the thing is, I think when we think of generally inflation and dangerous inflation, we're thinking of where the government is printing more money, right? In this case, it's not that the government's printing more money, it's that we'd probably be attributing it from the wealth being generated in certain concentrated areas. And so it's not the same thing. It's basically reworking, and we also have a very taxing welfare system that keeps people ensnared in perpetual state of poverty. Because if you make $10 more, all of a sudden you lose $500. You don't have to do the math to be like, it's easier for me to stay pretty close to being destitute and to get that extra $500 than to really excel. Okay. Whereas if we take and give everybody $1,000 a month, number one, we're getting rid of the stigma, and people can take greater risk, get educated, and they are going to be able to think more clearly. There's been studies shown that we lose about a standard deviation of our intelligence based on when we're worried about things like where we're going to eat or where we're going to sleep. So if you alleviate that thing, people no longer have such hardcore decision fatigue. They'll actually make better decisions.
Well, I agree that it's like you were saying the first thing you said about inflation. I agree that it's not the same thing as inflation. I just think that it leads to the same consequence, kind of inflation, because it lower. I mean, if everyone has the same baseline amount of resources, those resources just become less rare, which leads to the same consequence, I think. But I don't know. It sounds like
if we were in Singapore, I would agree with you, right?
Okay.
If we did a UBI in Singapore and we have 1 million people or 2 million people in our entire country, 100%. But our just country is so diverse in interest, in wants and ambition and opportunity that people aren't going to be spending in the same place.
Okay, and then you said the thing about welfare. You're saying that money would be better than like just food stamps.
Yeah. So the amount of bureaucratic stuff that the amount of systems that we have in place to basically vet people are expensive. And also when we take into consideration that these things trap people. Like there are people who want to do more, but they're afraid of losing their disability. People want to do more, but they're afraid of losing welfare. So you kind of create a reverse incentive to stay poor with these government programs.
Right, and I do agree with that. I guess I still feel that just if you hand them money, which is what that would be, what's the guarantee they're going to work harder because they're still on welfare, they're still relying on the money. It's just something they could use that's less, that they could use to buy something that's less responsible. They could spend it on anything.
100%. Well, here's the thing. Having had my experiences with a lot of people do. Eventually it's just going to make more sense for people. There are people who are just going to be fucked, right? But I rather those people. So when we take a look at poverty has a direct connection with crime, right? So if you remove poverty, which is basically creating everyone at a baseline, we can get a lot of people doing less crimes, which means a lot more people are going to explore different avenues within life, which means that more people are generally going to read. Sometimes people don't read a book because they can't afford a book. Right. Sometimes people don't develop skills because they don't have the time to develop those skills. And so it's not going to be a direct benefit. And there's just going to be overall a general sense of well-being that I think will be the product of that. And if everyone doesn't make responsible decisions with it, that's fine. They get a second chance. They get a third chance. They get a fourth chance. As a rich kid who grew up with tons of cash, it's just like one of the things I have been privy to. I've fucked up a lot in my life, but I've had a lot of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances, right? Whereas if I didn't have the situation I had, I would probably, there's a part of my life where I could very easily been homeless, and not that it was ever a thing that was going to happen for me because I had the support system and the support network, but it could have happened. And a lot of people don't have that.
Right. Yeah, poverty is tough to just nip in the bud with. I mean, I just think we could compare it to like people on disability, like people on disability get some money every month and doesn't cure the disability, obviously, and I don't know. I just feel like it's a similar comparison. I don't know if it just will
the
cure.
difference between that and disability, you can't do things like volunteer. You can't do certain types of jobs. You can't work a certain amount. So those are all things that, like, let's say you even get better at your disability, you kind of are like, well, will I find a job this quickly that's going to be able to repay me for that time? So I think that there is a lot to be gained by getting a lot of those people back in the workforce and being able to contribute in a meaningful way without fear that they're going to lose assistance that they might need.
Well, I think that's a good answer. I mean, I guess I could come around to this if I keep talking about it with people who actually have some knowledge on it. And what do you think of like inner city crime? And like, is that just related to poverty, or
No.
is it more based on societal reasons, or is it a lack of family values, or a mixture of and lack of education, or a mix of everything that I just mentioned?
It's a mix of everything. So I think one of the big things, the few big things that happened, I think the crack epidemic made things very bad, and I don't think things have recovered. I think centralized projects allowed crime to, like the same way that Mark Zuckerberg was able to turn and look to his roommate and start a multi-billion-dollar company with Facebook at Harvard. I think the same thing happens with crime whenever you have projects, is that it's a hotbed for criminal innovation because of proximity. Sure. And
proximity, yeah.
Then I think education being paid for by property tax is a big component. I think also there is, within inner city communities, there lacks the cultural capital, which means the cultural, like cultural resources. So that, my mom, when I was in between summers in school, she was teaching me what I was going to learn the next year. And that actually you're not supposed to spend the summer doing nothing, right? So you have a lot of kids who might be really smart, but their parents don't know that they should be teaching their kid during the summer, right? They think that the school's going to cover it 100%. They end up falling behind, they could be very smart initially, but now identify as being dumb because they made a few mistakes, and now they self-select themselves into worse and worse circles. I think, there's just such a multitude of issues that really, and I think it's not a single prong.
Right.
Problems.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's definitely not. And also, I think education is a big component, and family value is also just cultural. Like, it started with obviously many components, like you just mentioned, the crack epidemic, certainly Jim Crow laws, like historical racism, and because,
1 second, man.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. No. I was making sure I got the name right. Roland Fryer actually found out that the gap between white and black test scores goes away when you control for there being 100 books in the house. And what that shows was not so much that the kids read 100 books, but if you have over 100 books in your house, that is symptomatic of valuing education. And so really the concept of value in education changes everything. And I think there's a lot of cultural memes that exist within the inner city communities that are really disastrous for building wealth in a lot of ways.
And what would some of those memes be?
Number one, I think that, and this might get me some heat, that by being black, you are oppressed.
Right.
I don't think black equals oppressed. And I think that's a dated meme that...
To believe in the systematic, the ongoing present-day systematic...
So I do believe that there is a systematic racism in the criminal justice system. Okay. That's why I'm a proponent that we should hide the race and ethnicity of the defendant and the victim, right? Because it works both ways. You had the Geyer shooting where she shot a black guy in his house, cold blood. Murder gets 10 years. If they had hidden the identity and the sex of her, she'd be spending life in prison. So I do think that in the prison system there is that, but I don't think that the reason why there is, and I use black within quotes because black is not a monolith in America. When African Americans, I don't think our plight is solely caused by our blackness. I think that there's a multitude of issues, and by thinking that almost any time that someone doesn't like you or you don't get an opportunity, that it's because you're black, ends up hindering you very largely because you don't actually end up working on the things that are within your cone of control that can lead to a vastly different result. And the place you see this most evident is the difference in basically cultural circumstance of Nigerians and other African immigrants or descendants of African immigrants in America, where the highest pursuant of PhDs in America are Nigerians by ethnicity, beating out every other demographic. They're also making a lot of money per household. And a lot of this is new wealth because of a different cultural code. And it can even be argued that if blackness was the issue, they would have even more of a problem because they are darker in complexion than most African Americans, who are usually about 25 to 15% Caucasian.
Well, that is interesting and fascinating. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people want to just say it's just about race and that it's. But I agree that obviously there's a disproportionate amount of minorities arrested and given harsher punishments. I mean, the data shows that the prison rate is obviously much higher for those demographics.
A million percent. And but that also is another part of cultural capital where we don't have. So let's say even if let's use white within let's use suburban rather than that,
okay.
Right? Let's say there's a poor suburban kid or a poorer kid who goes to a suburban high school, right? He is more likely to know somebody within his circle who knows about the law than a kid who goes to an inner city school. He's more likely to know lawyers. He's more likely to have a friend whose dad is a lawyer, where he can ask questions or what to do or know what to do in those situations. That cultural capital isn't available in inner city communities because there's just less successful people around those people. Therefore, they might end up pleading out to something that is completely against their own interest because they don't know that they don't have to say anything, or they don't know that they can demand an attorney at any point in time and to remain being quiet.
Right. So that's just that's
these
just
things
knowledge.
might be available.
So we agree that there's definitely a cultural component, but I think you were getting at that education is a big one, and so you were saying
Huge
property tax, like that's one of the things that keeps these inner city or any poor school to keep it poor, is that the residents can't afford that. It comes from the residents around the school in the same communities. So would you be pro some kind of reformation of how schools get their funding?
Yeah, most definitely. So how I believe it should go is that you come out with you get your federal stipend per student, then you get your state stipend per how much you have allocated for budget for education for that state, and per student, every student gets the same amount of money. Now, wealthier neighborhoods can donate money to make their schools better, but they're not going to get away with not paying for or assisting the entire state. And that way you don't end up with public schools that have rock climbing walls and indoor swimming pools within the same city where they have not gotten new books in the last 15 years.
Right. Yeah, okay. I mean, I feel that something could be done there instead of just taking it from the locality, the same neighborhood. It's not even by county. It's by district. It's by, like, I don't know. It's by basically the same block or something. I don't really know how it works. I just know that.
I mean, it's absolutely insane when you think about, there are some houses, and a lot of times in wealthier school districts, a lot of those kids don't even go to the public school. So you have someone paying for like a $2 million house that's probably worth more in property tax value than blocks of houses in an inner city community. And that kid doesn't even go to that school. Whereas you have 20 families that are sending their kids to that school, all have to send their kids to that school. And they generate altogether less money than that one house.
So, and then another thing that might touch on feminism a little bit. Do you believe that single-parent households play a role in all this?
So what I think is, I don't think that it is I don't think it's necessarily that that's the case. I just think the situation that a lot of single mothers find themselves in create a circumstance for that to be the case. So a lot of times single mothers, maybe they don't have the family net, maybe they've been cast out by the family, which is a trope that happens quite often, that they have to work more. They don't have a ladder of authority. And what I mean by ladder of authority is that let's say my mom gets mad at me or your mom gets mad at you, she's like, I'm going to tell your dad, right? That's a ladder of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Even if your dad wouldn't have done anything different, there's still like a chain that of consequence that you want to avoid. Whereas when you're only one person and the authority lies with you, you're always forced with enacting the kind of the punishment, and there's nowhere further that you can take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So that's kind of the dynamic. It doesn't have to be a man. You're just saying it has to be another. Like it helps to have a chain, more than one parent.
Exactly, or one person in the place that the kid can feel a greater sense of fear to whenever that party's called in.
Right. Yeah.
And and if I was privileged to, my mom didn't work, or she worked at the library, so she could sit with me and make sure I got my stuff done. If you don't have the privilege of being able to do that, it's going to in turn lead to maybe lower scores or acting out more, et cetera, just because this person doesn't have as much time. So I don't think it has to do just solely with the fact that like a woman on her own can't handle a house. I just think it has to do with a single entity or a single person has a lot more difficult of a time, and it just happens to more often be the case be a woman.
Okay, that's fair. That puts you kind of in the middle then, and you're not like on the conservative side that just says, yeah, you need a man and a wife. You need a husband and a wife. I mean,
no, because I'm pretty sure, and I remember vaguely hearing this, that gay households raise very successful children. So I think it just has to do more so with two people being better at one. Mm-hmm. A job that's meant for two people is easier to do with two people.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where I think there's some common ground there, because I would say that some people would argue that it could be just as fine. I mean, not trying to take away from single parent households and say that it's impossible to raise a good kid. It's just harder is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but just time wise.
So would you call yourself a feminist?
No. Good. But not in the way in which I used to. So I think that I used to have like a not a lot of, I would say, empathy for modern feminism, because I only looked at it through the myopic lens of kind of being a man, feeling like I was always being made out to be the villain. And that's why I'm hesitant to adopt the label of feminist now, because I think there's a lot that is basically outlined as being part of that position that I don't agree with. Like, I don't think men are inherently evil or anything like that. That being said, I have come a lot more to the center on a lot of my views, and I think that, like, even though I think that Me Too was a great thing, I think
it was a great thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is that great. And the reason why, even if it feels like there's an overcorrection right now, is that there's been reported way fewer incidents happening all over the country. And so the amount of people who have been basically probably not hurt in the aggregate because of Me Too is really great. Because a lot of people don't come forward about those instances. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of times when men have done women wrong, in some instances, it was out of ignorance rather than malice, but that doesn't change the fact that it happened.
Right.
And cultivating that kind of awareness within myself, where I had conversations with people, I read men explain things to me, and those things really kind of shaped my understanding from a side point of view that I was never really willing to consider, because I didn't want to consider the fact that I could be a monster, I could be part of the problem. And so, yeah, but that being said, there's also just a lot under the feminist camp that I think keeps women ensnared in perceiving themselves as a victim. And I don't think we exist in a patriarchy. I think men are losing by every measurable standard. And I'm not saying that we're in a matriarchy. I'm not going that far. But I am saying that we can't call it a patriarchy when Men are getting paid less than women in their 20s. Men aren't graduating from school. Men are committing suicide. Men are more likely to suffer from addiction. Men are more likely to go to jail for the same crime. Men are more likely to experience multiple years of jail time for the same crime. So there are just a bunch of statistics that show that men are really suffering right now. And I'm not saying that this needs to be priority number one, but I think whenever people are talking about patriarchy now, they're making reference to, well, there's a select group of men who are making these. Well, that's not a patriarchy. That's oligarchy. That is another term, and we can't diagnose things with the wrong term, or we're going to prescribe the wrong solutions. And so that is basically kind of the note that I'm on, and why I wouldn't identify as a feminist, even though a lot of their tenets are things that I do now agree with and are empathetic to, or shut the fuck up on.
Well, that's a really good answer, and I agree that the Me Too movement is definitely a net positive. I think that men needed to be not just called out, but educated themselves about how to fucking not be a creep, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a great answer to why you're not a feminist, because I feel like you kind of need to justify it. Otherwise, people will try to shame you into it. It's one of those things.
And I mean, I still get shamed, but it's just like, to me, I read Why the Patriarchy Persists. I think the victim narrative, and I see it with the Black community as well, is that, and I'll speak as the Black community, or not as the Black. I speak as I am the Senate now. But as someone in the Black community, I attributed a lot of my failings to institutional racism when they were actually just character flaws. And there was a lot of growth that I kept myself from doing because I wasn't willing to say, well, maybe it's not my race. Maybe I'm just off-putting. Maybe I'm just not cool. Maybe I just don't dress right. I didn't take the self-analysis to produce different results. And now that I have done it, my life is so much better. And I think sometimes women fall into the camp on some issues where they put themselves as a victim in a situation where I'm not talking about sex stuff. I'm talking about just other stuff in general, societal things, where it's actually an opportunity to grow and as a person. And I think that they could end up getting more out of life if they weren't searching to see how they're a victim in that circumstance.
Yeah, the victim mentality thing is a big topic that I like to think about, because it's kind of against the whole woke movement. It's the opposite of what they're saying, victim mentality and just outrage culture. And so when did you start kind of going down? Like, did anyone in particular influence you to start thinking that way? Did you, like, what do you think of like Candace Owens? Because she says the exact same thing.
So I think Candace Owens is a coon. And I'll say, and that's why, so I went down a lot of this last year, but to me, Candace Owens takes it too far, right? I'm saying that you might still be victimized, but that's not 100% of the reason, right? There's a multitude of other things going on here that are leading to that result. And let's say, even if there was, let's say I got some of the result because I'm Black, that's still like 10 or 15%. It's not like it's not 85%. And those other things are 10, 15%. Whereas I think Candace Owens a lot of times makes it out to be like, this is all in your head, blah, 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 like, get over it, and I think that I just think that the conservative narrative, there's a lot there in that camp that is kind of disastrous for the world. And honestly, for lower income people, not just Black people. And I think there's a lack of empathy on her part. Like, the Conservative Party wants to get rid of things like the L in Chicago. They want to get rid of public transportation.
I didn't know that.
And what?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So basically, whenever you guys voted in, when was the last time you guys had a Republican governor?
I don't know. A while ago, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
He tried to cut funding for the subway in Chicago by 50%. And it failed, but basically what they try to do is they're trying to take apart public transit to feed their boys to buy more cars. And that's just one example of the many ways that they have a war against the poor. And so I don't support people who support I just don't support people who want conservatives in power.
So the
Even
issue,
if they're black.
so with Candace Owens, it's not that I mean, it's not just that she's a conservative that you call her. I mean, that's a pretty strong stance on her.
Yeah, yeah. So also, I just think she's in bed. So I just think that she has found a lane to profit in terms of being having the views that she has with a black face. And
Okay.
and I don't have a quote right now of like things that she said, but there are many things that she said, and it's about nuance where I'm like, yeah, this is a little bit too far. I think that you at this point are, yeah, it's just too far.
So you believe that the reason you call her that word, I kind of associate that with her letting down her own community, like her own race,
Yeah, but
Okay.
in a but kind of so, and I'm glad we're unpacking this, because I need to get out what I like, kind of where I stand, because I don't get to talk about Candace Owens that often. I think the main thing is that she's selling out her own race to profit, and I don't look at race as a team in a lot of respects, and I think it's a, and I'm gonna sound like a hypocrite. I think it's just like not great to look at your race as a team. But that being said, there are times you can make decisions based on that paradigm that I think actually are bad for your own community. And I just think that she's just wrong a lot of the time. And yeah, I wouldn't say the same thing about Kanye West. I don't
Really?
think Kanye West is.
I was gonna ask you about him too, in the
Yeah.
sense that what we were just talking about was just like how you shouldn't have that victim mentality thing. I don't really see the difference between her, and Kanye. I feel like they both kind of, but obviously she is way more vocal, so she has much more opportunities for you to disagree with her. Kanye just talked about the whole slavery is a choice thing, and people blew that up and took it kind of out of how he meant
Context.
it, kind of context. Like they just heard that one piece of it. But I think all he's saying is that don't treat yourself as that it's completely, unchained. That it's a victim thing. That you should, if you're black, then it's hopeless, and like the lower expectations thing. Like, okay, I guess we should just, like he's doing pretty well as an individual, and I think you could excel pretty well based regardless of your background is I think what he was getting at. Same with Candace.
Well, so the main difference is Candace. So I like to create the distinction between personal philosophy and political philosophy. So the things, and I think a lot of times there's a massive conflation on the right between their own personal philosophy and applying that to the macro, right? Where it's like, well, in this case, it worked out for me. And honestly, a lot of those self-determining, I'm a Nietzschean. I think those are really great ideals to have if you want to prosper as an individual. But that being said, when you're talking about it at the political level, where that's where mainly Candace Owens is speaking, where Kanye was just making statements. And these were Kanye's also subpoints was, if I can't say that I'm conservative, then I'm not free. That was the subtext of his art. If you tell me because I'm black I cannot be something, then I'm not actually free. The other part of it was that we are slaves. He was talking about we're slave to brands, we're slave to other people's expectations, all of these other things that are wrapped up in this. And at that point, slavery is a choice, right? And that we can choose whether or not we want to continue to be slaves. So he's making kind of statements about self-determination,
Okay.
which are great. When Candace Owens speaks, she's speaking about actual policy considerations that will have an effect on people's lives that are no longer whether or not this is about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. This person has a disability, and are they going to be able to get to their job if you cut funding for this? Those are the things that are coming up where people who are dependent on infrastructures and basically cities working in a particular way. She's supporting a side that wants to basically take that away and basically have people not be able to succeed or have fewer opportunities to succeed in what she's supporting publicly when it comes down to political ideology. And in political ideology, you have to make politics not only work for well-bodied, people when they're healthy, but when they're sick, for the margins of situations, right? Like, you can't pull up your bootstraps if you're quadriplegic and things like that. So when she speaks on things like healthcare and all these other things that are going to uniquely hurt the Black community, because not only, but a lot of Black people are uninsured, that means that people are going to die from the things that she's pushing for, right? From things that they wouldn't have to die for. Or by pretending things like that don't exist or aren't problems, like the insulin issue, where people can't afford to get insulin because we're not telling pharmaceutical companies to limit how expensive they can make it, where if you go to Canada, it's $100 for a year, and in America, it's thousands.
Yeah, I don't know her positions on that well, but I think she would agree that it's fucked up to have such a high cost on insulin. She's for the free market, so that would mean she's probably for more competition and less costs, lower costs for insulin. But that's just because I saw one episode of her show where she did specifically talk about that. She was like, "This is ridiculous. This is not a left-right issue. This is just like both sides agree that it's fucked up that healthcare is so expensive in this country."
Well, you know what, man? I'm speaking out of turn then. I'm making blanket statements because she supports characters like Trump who do support those kind of things. And I was making basically a fallacy-based argument on who she associates with. So if she said otherwise, I'll take your word on that. But it's just kind of like those kind of conservative policies can have a really bad effect, specifically on the Black community, but poor people in general.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know who would be for, so these expensive proprietary costs on drugs and everything, and insulin. I mean, insulin is a good example because it's cheaper. Like, why is that? So I just don't know much about that, but it just seems ridiculous that
So the medical industrial complex basically pays itself out in that they're owned by the same groups. So the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies are paying themselves back and forth.
Right. Okay. So it's just arbitration. It's just like bureaucracy bullshit.
Exactly.
Right.
And the reason this doesn't happen in other countries is other countries have put a limit on how much certain drugs can cost. But in America, since so many politicians, specifically conservative politicians, but also Democrats as well, are in the bed with pharmaceutical companies, that was never argued for. Now it's spiraled out of control.
Okay, so that's a lack of regulation thing and just giving them too much freedom, but not in the way that we like, not in the way that I like at least, which is free markets and capitalism, allowing competition to make shit cheaper. That's what I would think would be a good thing for Medicare. Well,
capitalism as an end destroys itself because it's basically what ends up happening is that if the free market is the only rule, what ends up happening is people end up bending the rules. And that's why you need a state. I get in arguments a lot of time with libertarians and, I strawman their arguments a lot of times by saying, well, hey, if you did it all on your own, go set up a business in Mogadishu, right? If the state is only getting in the way. And you never generally hear libertarians when they talk about where they want to live. You're never hearing them talk about they talk about the policies and things that are wrong with Germany, but where do they go on vacation? Germany, Sweden, where do they want to go? When you go to those places, a lot of it makes sense. I think a lot of times it's not I'm a big Andrew Yang fan, and he says it's not left, not right, it's forward. And we're kind of caught in this stupid debate where one of the I like Hegel, and one of the things that I really like about him is that he says that the truth lies neither in the thesis nor the antithesis, but a synthesis of the two. And I think that's especially the case with capitalism and social, not socialism, but social institutions to basically keep capitalism from destroying itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the debate. It's like, where's the line? How much regulation do we want? How big of a government do we want? How much programs do we want? And like people on the right are terrified of obviously socialism, and they love talking about globalism and how they don't want that. They like the nations staying, preserving their, culture and borders being not closed, but just not open. Like, I don't know. It's
I've got a huge fight with an ex-girlfriend over open borders with Mexico.
Yeah.
Super against open borders with Mexico.
Yeah, I don't know how anyone could be just pro open borders for any country.
I mean, unless you have the history that the European Union has, and I'm a British citizen, I'm affected by Brexit, but I also understand Brexit in that the immigration load was unduly placed on the UK because most people speak English as a foreign language. So most of the migrants would come in Sweden or Germany and then move immediately to the UK. And I'm not buying into the scapegoating arguments that the Brexit committee used. I actually think Brexit might be the worst decision the UK could have made, but I also do understand the decision when you have people coming into your country that you're not in control of who's coming in, the talent that's coming in, and also you're watching culture change very rapidly.
Yeah.
It's with people who don't share the same.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely what people on the right say, but I don't think you have to be on the right to take it valid, because I don't consider myself conservative. But I mean, I listen to what they're saying about that. I mean, it sounds, people just like to call you whatever the word is, not xenophobic. Like if you talk about how you want to actually enforce immigration laws.
Well, you 100% have to, and if you look historically speaking, that when you have a lot of people, number one, here's the biggest issue with the migrant crisis in the EU, was that it was too many people, not too fast. And I understand that there was a need and people were starving to death and dying, but they didn't create the infrastructure to integrate people. And that creates a class of individuals who don't feel like they can contribute meaningfully to society. And if you don't feel like you can contribute meaningfully to society because you've been shut out, you develop an underclass where crime increases. You combine that with the fact that a lot of the cultures are different, just very different, and you have to protect liberalism at all costs. And that even in America, we have to protect it against fundamentalist groups like fundamentalist Christians, right? Fundamentalist groups will always try to destroy liberalism. And I think that a lot of times in Western civilization, and in the West specifically, we have had such a bad history with cultural supremacy that we have gone completely the other way, which is like we can't critique cultures that aren't our own, which is stupid. I think it's just I'm going to critique Saudi Arabia for not educating women and limiting women's opportunities, right? I can say, Sam Harris makes the argument it's objectively worse not to educate women from a resourced position.
I mean,
and that's not the case. Sorry, let me finish the point. Any pretending like that's not the case is being purposely obtuse.
Right. I mean, I agree with that. What's wrong with? I mean, that's what people argue. Is that you can't, that all cultures are perfectly the same. You can't critique any aspect of any other culture. You have to respect them. So how is that cultural supremacy, though, to just like, what were you referring to with that? You mean like...
So the fear on the left is that the West has had such a history with declaring their culture the best culture.
Yeah.
And so that's gone completely the other way, that people now are afraid to criticize other cultures.
Got it.
Right. But I'm going to criticize people cutting off clits in Africa. Right. I'm just going to, and yeah, I might not understand your cultural need, but I can say objectively, you're diminishing the value that one person can take out of their life because of that behavior. And I think that what's really cool about globalism and multiculturalism is that we have this intersection of culture that ends up being the war of ideas. And generally speaking, a lot of times the best ideas do win out. And that's why there's a lot of people, one of the reasons I think that historically speaking, when we take a look at Africa's development towards the rest of the world, Africa is such a massive landmass that there wasn't as much cultural diffusion because there was not as much necessary intersection of culture for a lot of the spaces, because people think of Africa as one big place, but it's huge. And the amount of habitable land is even larger than Asia, right? It's a massive continent. And so you have people didn't need to run into each other. Whereas you take somewhere like Europe or the coastal China, there was a lot of trade back and forth, separation by national markers. Different cultures existed where they then innovation was shared in all of these other things. And so I think that cultures mixing with each other leads to faster innovation. And it also, we have a lot of cultural myths. So the reason I'm moving to France is I'm working on a book about the relationship between culture, tribalism, and identity. And what I describe culture as is a shared story, a myth that we tell ourselves of connection, right? What do I or you really have in common with somebody from Alaska? That's a myth. It's a story we made up, but that story becomes real by the behaviors and commentary that we pay to it. And when we take a look at a lot of the different myths that come about, they can exist, but when we smash them together, we find out what's real and what's not true.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's interesting. It's like, yeah, I mean, I guess culture, and also just reminds me of how people use the word culture just for internet culture. Like, it's just these memes that come about and these behaviors that just naturally come about, and sometimes they're not good, and sometimes I don't know. I don't know. I'm just learning. I don't have a brilliant. It's just so that's why you're moving to France to work on a book.
Yeah, so I just finished a product launch here, and Lemon and I finished writing a book, and he had to stop me because I was getting really, just kind of really into a lot of concepts about identity, which wasn't the general thesis of the book that we had just got done writing. And so I'd been just inspired by a lot of French philosophers, and he was actually the one who pushed me that I should move to France instead of back to London.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's just a lot of it. Like, I think that when we take a look at culture, I think number one, that cultures that tend to excel are ones that have a better representation of how reality actually is. And so if you exist within a culture, let's say the Sears business culture, to not make it loaded, Sears had a worse cultural map than Amazon. And that's why Sears is going out of business, because they failed to see reality as it actually is, even though they saw the infrastructure. Same with Netflix and Blockbuster. Netflix understood the culture of individuals is that people want to stay home and do less work. Blockbuster didn't listen to that and therefore went out of business. The same thing works with different varying ethnicities. And if your cultural story is closer to reality, then there's more innovation that's able to be taken place. I suspect that one of the reasons why Europe pushed ahead of China and India, which wasn't the case for a majority of civilization. Majority of civilization, India and China were more developed. But there came about a time where the scientific method arose, which was basically a cultural meme where you assumed that the previous story was wrong, and your story that you come up with was wrong, but your pursuit was to become less wrong. That's a very advanced way of thinking. When you compare that to very religious countries, they very rarely innovate because their entire cultural concept is that God made things the way they are. There's really no reason to innovate because there's nothing that can happen outside of the predestined plan. That leads to very little innovation happening. And that's why if you take a look at a lot of religious texts, they do not innovate over time, because in order for the text to remain sacred, they cannot. If the Bible was constantly getting amended, it would lose its appeal of sacredness, and people would realize, oh, it was just a bunch of niggas who got together and threw a book together, right? I mean, yeah. That's another reason why we don't amend the Constitution regularly, because as long as we don't amend it, it can have the aura of symbolic importance, right? And that's why we don't change them.
Yeah, and I hang out on these conservative parts of the internet, like, because they kind of get forced into these, like, very
Like B?
specific. What was that?
Are you Betard?
Oh no, not like I don't really go on 4chan, but I assume that's where a lot of them still go because there's no censorship there. Anywhere that there's no
Mm,
censorship is where they go. Like I mostly go on like streaming, like just wherever wherever all these social people banned from social media go is where I am talking about, and a lot of them are very Christian, and I haven't really heard from Christian people in a while. Now I'm starting to hear from them again, and they seem to me kind of regressive because they're talking about how they're against a lot of shit that I find okay, like gay marriage and like a lot of them are pretty regressive, and but I still hear from
yeah.
them. They're getting more vocal, I guess, but also they got to go somewhere because those ideas are not dying yet.
No, and you can't just stub them out. What you want to do is, so generally, when I have engaged white supremacists in the past, and I'm not saying that all Christians are white supremacists or whatever,
Hmm.
or any, because I've gone through those places. I've been on Stormfront.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I've, just to see what other people are thinking and saying. But generally, when I see, and there's been a huge movement towards white supremacy, it's a lot bigger of a thing now than it was maybe before in terms of like people identifying as racist, at least on the internet. And I
Yeah,
think
I'm
it's
learning a
largely,
lot. A lot of
yeah,
anti-Semitism. Yeah.
a lot of anti-Semitism. And one of the things that I remind, I lived in Texas. A lot of times I remind these guys because they're talking about, oh, we built the automobile, we built. I was like, you haven't done anything. You have not done anything. Stop saying we.
Yeah, I don't get
And
it.
that kind of because there is no white collective team. You can't claim other people's successes as your own. And a lot of these guys are not successful in their own right. So they have to claim the successes of their race, which doesn't actually exist. Race is a new innovation. Most of the people who are considered white now weren't considered white 80 years ago.
Right.
Like, and so what I want to do is basically, number one, break down how they are perceiving themselves because they're basically doing it to insulate themselves from their own failure.
So I mean, I agree with
And
all that. Oh, sorry, you want to finish your thought?
oh no, 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 I'm so
So I agree that obviously there's extremism going on, and you could associate that with the right. These extremists who are just straight up anti-Semitic, anti-minority, and pro. They're not all Christian, but most of them happen to be Christian and like fundamental or whatever you want to call it. And definitely homophobic. And so, also, would you say that the left is starting to become a little bit racist? Like, because obviously the alt right is a very heated thing, but do they have any like? Is there somewhere not quite on that extreme, but somewhere just in between the center and the extreme right, where there's some truth about how there's like this white sentiment that could become dangerous? Because I hear that it's on Reddit, anytime you mention anything about the white race or like people being racist against white people or anything like white genocide, it gets downvoted to hell. And
so white genocide is I've done a lot of research into this kind of stuff, and I want to do a video on it in the future. But basically, is a lot of people are identifying as white supremacists right now because they are not getting access to things they perceived as resources that they were guaranteed as a birthright when they were younger. That's why a lot of people are going over to that. One of those things being white women. Back in the day, they imagined that everybody was going to get a girl. A lot of these guys are just lonely guys who aren't getting access to the women that they think they deserve.
mm-hmm.
And the whole concept of white genocide is white people aren't fucking enough white people, and it's killing us.
Yeah,
But that's actually not.
White genocide. I mean, I don't believe in that. That is a white supremacist idea, and that is an alt-right idea, and there's no evidence for it. But there is I guess there is evidence for the lower whatever, like birth rate. Like there is some truth
Low,
that white people will become a minority. I don't know if that's, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but some people are
yeah.
certainly concerned about it.
So I have another video that I'm making where it's financially irresponsible to get an American woman pregnant. The reason why there's fewer, it's just financially. The joke is basically that it just because we don't have health insurance or anything like that by birthright, that having kids with an American woman is it's like $500,000 more than if you had kids with a German woman or a Norwegian girl, because et cetera, et cetera. But part of the reason why white birth rates are down is because a lot of the stuff that the right is arguing for is basically keeping people from having kids. And a lot of people are focusing on their career to basically afford to be able to have kids. Part of it is also that the more developed economically you become, the later you have kids and the fewer kids that you have. And that's because you can afford birth control younger, right? And so that's why the birth rates are lower, right?
That's
is
one
because
reason.
you
I think, yeah, that's one reason. I heard that minorities have more abortions than anyone.
yeah, and that's because they don't have birth control.
Okay.
So because they don't have health
Right.
insurance,
Sure.
they have less access to birth control. And so abortions are a very expensive and emotionally taxing way of doing the same thing. But I've been having lots of unprotected sex. I should have kids, right? But no, I have unprotected sex with girls who are on birth control. And so I don't have the same kind of problems. And so this is largely an issue if they really wanted to, if they were really worried about it, get health care for everybody. And that way young girls can be on birth control when they're in high school, and they're not going to have as many kids because they're going to have more opportunities in the future.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess the thing I was just trying to get at, I shouldn't have, like, the white genocide thing, that's a very, something I don't think is that relevant to today's. I don't think people are like, because that would be people actually trying to kill white people. It's not just the birth rate going down. I don't think those are the same thing. But the left, because I mentioned that obviously there's extremism on the right and racist people on the right that are overtly racist, but also on the left, I think they're getting more overtly.
Oh, a million percent. So the same arguments that I'm making about the white people can't say we in the same way, I think black community needs to stop doing the same thing.
Okay.
So I think it's a two-way street, Jack, and that I think here's the thing. To me, if I'm being honest with you, in terms of racist sentiment, I think that a lot of minority groups are more racist than a lot of white groups. And I'll speak as the Indian community. I won't speak as any other community, but one that I'm half part of. Indian community is one of the most racist communities in the fucking world. And never get credit for it. You don't think of an Indian when you think of a fucking racist, but they hate anybody who's not exactly like them. And it's sick and disgusting, and we don't call people out like that on the left because it's the same cultural thing. I can't tell you that culturally blah blah blah, but yeah, I think, and when I listen to a lot of what I call straw manning white people, and it's the same thing that racists use on the right. When you straw man, oh, you white person that never had to work for anything, blah blah blah, all this other stuff. What you're creating is a straw man to argue against, which is the equivalent of LaQuisha, the welfare queen. And these straw mans are really destructive because they're cultural memes that don't actually they exist, but there's such a small plurality of individuals that it's not really representative of what's actually going on. And that's why I think we need to move past the social technology of race. I think a lot of our discussion is limited by our concept and understanding of using old world terms to deal with new world problems. I think we'd be better off if we talked about people in terms of suburbanites and urbanites, right? I think that would be that will probably encapsulate the cultural experience of a lot of people more so than talking about race. But yeah.
Class. Yeah. Okay. And then we kind of touched on this a little bit. So another way that that's like overt, like what we just talked about, like another more subtle form of what I would call racial discrimination, I think is unhealthy, would be like affirmative action. I think that's a more subtle thing that the left is for still, they still want that. They want reparations as well. And I don't know. I don't think it's that fair to just give someone an opportunity based on identity. It's not unfair. It's racist towards them, not to white people. It's bad. It's like it's condescending.
This is where I have an interesting experience with this, is that I think when we talk about education, when we talked about the beginning of it, where we were speaking about, hey, these schools are massively underfunded and all of these other things, I think it should be based on need. I think that cultural differences on a campus, and I think that if you want to have a diverse student body, that should be, and the way we have it right now is not a point system, but it's part of the collective thing, but it animates into being a real thing, right? Where it's like all together you have like, so the way it is you can't have a point system where you award someone a point for being a different race, but you can take it into consideration because you're taking a look at the cultural experience of your student body, which I actually do think is valuable to interact with people different than you.
Okay.
That being said, I think it's having a real effect, and like people aren't getting into school, right? Like generally speaking, Asian people are not getting into school because of the glut of high scoring Asians with high GPAs.
Right, they have the reverse
they're entitled to.
They have the opposite of affirmative action. I mean, they have they're
overrepresented minority.
Right.
And what the problem is that so for example, Harvard has been at the forefront of this, even though they've accepted more Asian students in this last class than they've ever before, and it's been going up ever since. They're not coming after people who are legacies, right? They're not coming after, oh, your dad went to Harvard, now you get into Harvard. They're not coming after those people. They're just coming after affirmative action people because they're black and shouldn't be there. I think is kind of an interesting thing, where we're not like, hey, let's get rid of legacies. Why do we have legacies? Why does it matter that your dad went there before? That shouldn't be part of the process. No, we're going to come after a community that wasn't allowed access to equal education and still isn't up until now. So that's kind of where I sit on that, is that when you take a look at the amount of cultural advantages that people who don't live in inner cities have, because it's not uniquely a black problem, and that's why I think it should be need-based. I think need should be one part of the equation, not only race.
Right.
You're looking
exactly.
It what?
I agree with that. It shouldn't be just race. It should be, because, you could be poor. It's the equal opportunity versus equal outcome. I'm for equal opportunity. Like, if you're from a poor, fucking shitty school, it doesn't matter what your race is. Either way, it's going to be harder to get the resource education you need.
Exactly. So, I think that should be weighted in the evaluations of this, right? Because like a lot of these kids, though, that just happen to also be black are getting an inferior education. And so it's just more difficult when they don't have the money or the resources to pay for SAT classes, don't have the time to sit around and study the same amount of time, can't afford the AP exams. So there's just like a lot not available if you're poorer. Then, and I'm saying this should be no matter what race you are. I think it should be part of the evaluation.
Exactly. That's all I'm saying too. That's why I think it's kind of more, it's kind of degrading to just say, oh, you're just this race, so we're going to assume that you didn't have the opportunities. I mean, that might be the case just by happenstance, but by the numbers, certainly that's how it is, but not for everybody, not on the individual level.
I mean, there's no way so I went to Chicago Kent, which when I got in was like number 60 law school. So it was a tier 2 school, but it was a pretty good school in the city. And there's no way I should have got a 50% scholarship with my grades from undergrad, and race was definitely part of the equation. I'm not mad about that. It's just part of the equation. And now that I've profited from it, I don't want to talk down from it, but it does. And I'm also not I'm not the paragon example of who it's trying to help, right? I'm actually the straw man people use on why it shouldn't be applied anymore. But yeah, it's just, I think it's one of those things. But I think as long as inner city schools, which are predominantly black due to white flight and all these other things, remain being so shitty, I'm kind of okay with it still being used within the spectrum of decision making. But I just think needs to be added.
And you just mean on the college level we're talking, or just the whole?
So here's the thing is, like you're talking about for like jobs and job placement and stuff like that.
I was thinking even before, like it's basically as soon as you enter the school system is when you're starting to miss out on it. So I feel like it could be applied. But if we're talking affirmative action as it's defined, it would probably mean for college and then I guess jobs. But
yeah, so and that exists in some way, like they're like minority job fairs and stuff like that. But so the reason why a lot of that exists, and it goes back to what I talked about with cultural capital, is like there's just like not the shared context, or not shared context of understanding the nuances and etiquette or whatever, because your family hasn't been there before, right? And so it's just a very complex situation to redress what's happened in the past. And I think, I really don't know. I really, I just think I think creating first generation wealth is very difficult. And especially when you look like you are first generation wealth. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also if you do become successful for some reason it's hard to stay successful if you just get lucky, or I don't know. Maybe like obviously that's why I think that handouts are not good, because it's not like winning the lottery, but like that's just an example. Like if you just get handed a big sum of money, doesn't mean you're going to be responsible with it. I don't know. But yeah, it's complicated.
And I think the main difference between, let's say, winning the lottery and a UBI is the glut. So a lot of the problems that happen with the lottery is people's awareness that you've gotten so much money, and your feelings of rising in status, but also feeling like you don't deserve it and not having to work. Whereas with the UBI, unless someone's trying to live in pretty close to absolute poverty, they're still going to need to do something else. And also, not everybody's going to be constantly asking for money because they're getting their own UBI. So they're not really having to deal with the same social disadvantages that somebody who just won the lottery is.
Right.
So, and a lot of times what money is for isn't just to meet the bare needs, but we use money as a form of status. The reason why most people are more depressed than ever is because we have status anxiety, and we're very aware of how we stack up due to social media. I don't think that's bad or good either way. It's just that's the case. Things are actually better than they've ever been, right? We're not in the same city. We're having a video podcast thing. You're not a millionaire, but you have a podcast studio at your crib. You're able to get in touch with the best-selling author and have them on there. I have a phone that can land a plane and call a car that costs $4 to drive me across the city. While doing that, I can get a date and hook up with her that night. Like, life is fucking amazing. But the reason why people don't perceive it as being amazing is that we don't feel like we have enough status. And that is not going to be solved with a UBI.
Well, that's a good point. Status. It's an illusion, though. It's bullshit. Status should not be the only determinant. Should not be the greatest determining factor for happiness. I don't think.
I think that it is a very powerful social rearing mechanism.
I just don't think it's a healthy thing for it to be that way, because it's bullshit. Whenever I take psychedelics, I realize that it's fake.
It's fake. It's an illusion, man.
Exactly. The coolest people are not any cooler intrinsically than the most uncool people. It's exactly fake.
It's a manufactured thing, but I think even though status is made up, it has real effect, right? Like, I feel like fame is wasted on the famous. That a lot of times that I just think is the big problem with cess is that the wrong people have it.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. You're saying it should be. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, what's up?
I think what you might be getting at is that status should not be wasted on people who don't deserve it. Like, it should be applied to people who are actually, like, turning the gears on, like, actually, like, helping people, maybe? I don't know.
Well, even someone like a Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah.
Like, thank God Joe Rogan is famous. Like, a celebrity like Joe Rogan has never existed before.
Right.
And the amount of information that's being passed on to people is absolute. Joe Rogan is a university of sorts for many. Many people who can't afford to go to college or listen to any of these conversations or be privy to these conversations. And so I think that's one place where fame is actually really, he's doing a good job with it. I just think that a lot of times when we take a look at, like, let's say, imagine if Ariana Grande just started really, like, reading, Camus and Baudrillard and all these other people, and she started telling her listening base about that. All of a sudden, you'd have a lot of, like, young women and young boys thinking about the hyper real and it's the simulacra and simulation and things like that, where they're really looking at reality as it is. But the fact of the matter is, somebody like Ariana Grande is never going to read that book because she doesn't have to, because she's already validated enough, or she doesn't have the intrigue, and that's why she's interesting. And but that's also, I just think that the goal should be that more people should want to be more smart, diligent thinkers should want to be famous.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would make the world a better place. I think it's selfish that smart people are ugly. That's a choice a lot of times. They don't dress nice and they don't work on their voice, their charisma. And I think it holds society back because they validate themselves by just being smart, as if it's not their responsibility to change the masses and be someone who's aspirational in nature. I think that's 100% their fault. And I think that if a smart person's listening to this and they're like, oh, but, like, I'm so above it, you're exactly the fucking problem, and you should go kill yourself because you're not even fucking useful to society.
Wow. So you're saying it's the full package?
It's a full package. It's not the herd's fault. Why are all these smart people just, a lot of smart people just don't have enough self-confidence and are too selfish to work on their looks.
Interesting. Well, I feel like that's a really big topic we could get into. I feel like it's a good time to let you go, just because I have another person I want to call.
No problem.
But I feel like we could talk for a long time.
This is great, man. I had a great time.
Great, dude. Yeah, it was really fun.
Dude, keep killing the game. Love your look.
You too. You look great. And also, I'm excited for when you're on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Dude, hopefully soon, man. Thanks, bro.
Sounds great, man. All right, good talking. Peace. All right. That was William Beteet III. Wow, that was quite a good conversation. We covered a lot of scary topics, and there's some glitches in the Skype. Jittery. It froze, so I got to work on that because I like having people on video. Also, I forgot to press the record button on this thing, so I'm going to have to, like, download it from Facebook or some bullshit like that. But either way, I will do. It's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to lose it. So I'm going to call someone else who wanted to be on the show. Let's see if he's available. Trevor. You can hear it ringing. That sounds like I'm calling a boat. Hey.
Hello.
How's it going, man? Sorry you had to wait so long.
Oh, dude, you're fine.
Okay,
I got no
cool.
problem with that.
Yeah, I didn't think we would talk that long, but wow, it turns out we had a lot to talk about. So.
I thought it was pretty interesting.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it got intense for a little bit because we were talking a lot about, like, racial stuff and, like, I'm white, so.
Yeah.
I was nervous.
Well, yeah.
But
I
anyway,
think he had an interesting take for. I think he had a very unique take for someone who is black.
Yeah, exactly. I had a feeling he would be a good guest. So anyway, Trevor, I wanted to have you on to talk about some drama that happened.
Oh yeah, some drama in the comedy scene that I'm apparently a part of.
So this was a part of the suburban scene also? Like, I guess you have a
Yes.
car in, so you go to the suburbs a lot, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I live in the suburbs.
And you
Technically, I'm a suburban comic.
got it. So without naming any of the proper nouns, like I'm gonna show the letter, but also tell me, how did you find where'd you get this letter? Where'd you get the screenshots from? How'd you find?
Because the other people that were involved in the letter, contacted me about said letter,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I found out about it.
Mm.
And there's also a few other issues, like the host of this open mic that apparently we were all talking shit about has blocked me on Facebook.
Okay, well, I got the letter and I blurred out all the names, so except for yours.
All right.
So I could read it really quickly. Dear somebody, I just thought you should know that the following comedians, in quotes, have been bad-mouthing your show / auditions and telling local suburban comedians not to bother auditioning or performing at blank. In fact, most of their something celebration was spent bad-mouthing you and the show you produce. It seems that there is a group of open mic comics that always work at the blank that feel they are actual comedians because they have been appearing at the same open mic for over 2 years now. Wow, what a bunch of salt this guy's throwing out. They poke fun at the fact that you judge the crowd laughs and reactions during the audition process instead of the actual comedian material, yet you are not a comedian and therefore you have no background to do such a thing. That was a very clunky fucking sentence. Like, what the hell? They are completely oblivious to the fact that the audiences must laugh at comedians and the material, and if no laughs happen, then it's no comedy. Wow. This guy writes like a fucking baby boomer.
That's what I showed a few people that message, and that's what they think. They think it's an older gentleman.
Dude, he sounds old as fuck. And then there's like a second page. Also, the fact that he printed out a letter.
Oh my gosh, you should read the second page. That's where it gets really funny.
Here's the second page. They have been burning bridges all over Chicago and the suburbs. I just thought it was important for you to know this so you can take into account who you allow to audition. I think many of these people feel they are hilarious and the problems are with the audiences, not them or their material. Anyway, good luck with the venue and the show. The Comedy Tattletale. Wow. Like, so now that we read the letter, what did you do to deserve this?
I talked shit about that open mic. I mean, see, here's the thing. I don't know if the person that wrote that letter actually knew about everyone talking shit, because there's a few people on that letter that like don't know anyone, or there was one person on that letter that we contacted that literally hasn't done stand-up in like 3 years. So I'm thinking that whoever heard us talk shit about said quote-unquote mic, that open mic, it's not an open mic, it's like a showcase, but I'll explain that. Mm-hmm. But whoever I think heard us talk shit about it, I think that they just saw Facebook comments of us saying possible negative things about it, and that's why
so it wasn't even in person?
What?
It wasn't even in person then?
I don't think so. I mean, they could have been there for this first. So what the showcase is, let me explain that. Originally, it was at this place. It's an open mic in the Lombard suburban area. And the showcase used to be a comedy competition where the top comedian would get $100. And then they would get money at the bar, like bar money, like for that specific place. They would get that for second and third place. Mm-hmm. And the host ended up pissing off the staff members and getting kicked out of the show. Like they were like, yeah, we don't want you here anymore. He ended up getting it back because he ran this new show. What it was he was doing auditions. The host was doing auditions to be on a national headliner in the main room of this place, and supposedly it could fit like 500 people.
National
So people were
headliner?
like, "Oh, I
Okay.
could perform stand-up comedy in front of 500 people. Of course, I'm going to do it."
In Lombard.
So he was like running the show, and I don't know if the person who made this letter like heard us talk shit about it the first day we were there. Because I went to this show and I did the show, the first one that they hosted for this audition.
Mm-hmm. So how the fuck? So just to back up, when you say national headliner, what does that mean? If it's in
He said he's going to get a national headliner for this show, and that all the comedians that he's going to do a competition every week for like 9 weeks, and that whoever wins each week is going to be put on this showcase.
Got it.
For this national headliner.
So you're trying to think back to what. So you might have actually talked shit in person. Like, did you do what it said in the letter?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, because the issue with this open mic is that this guy that hosts it, he has that favoritism complex, and he likes to pick whoever he likes to be the winner.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't actually base it off of who should actually be the winner.
Right.
Because of how they make the crowd laugh.
So you did it. So did you do well, in your opinion?
Oh, at that open mic, I did okay, but I also started out by kind of talking shit to the host as a joke.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sure he didn't like that, even though he fired back and it was funny and it got laughs.
Huh. Yeah, it is interesting to do that. Like, I do that sometimes with, like, sometimes as the host, I'll do that. I try not to do it if I'm not hosting, but it can happen. Like, I try not to do that if I'm at someone else's open mic.
Yeah.
Definitely not show if they booked me. If it's a person who booked me, I'm not going to fucking be a dick to them. At least I'll try not to. But if I'm the host for an open mic and someone talks shit about me, it fucking sometimes does get to me, to be honest.
That makes sense.
So
I get it, but...
So, I mean, I think this drama's hilarious, but... like,
I think it's hilarious, too, until there was, like, supposedly other letters put out to try and bash other comedians' names.
Yeah, I mean, the way he called you out was very immature.
I think it's comical. I think that letter in particular is comical.
Yeah, like, it's not like he was trying to, like, he was just trying to not get you booked at this particular place. Like, I don't know, it could be worse, but it's just so petty, I guess.
I know, right? It's just so childish that an adult would write such a letter.
So, do you regret any of your behavior at this mic?
No, I'm still gonna say what I think about it, because here's the issue with that open mic. The open mic that they do there, it's not a bad mic by any means, and it does actually produce a crowd, but the issue is that they just do ambush comedy. They just attack these people that are just sitting at the bar. They're just like, okay, now we're doing comedy, and the audience members do not like it.
All right, just was wondering, so going forward, will you try not to like, shit on the room or shit on the host? Did you get any sense of maybe not, like, did you change your, do you think you're going to change your behavior? Like, I already asked you that. You said no.
Yeah, I feel like I'll do it
nothing.
at some place. I only should do it at an open mic where I feel like it would be acceptable.
Right, and that's hard to read sometimes. It seems like you didn't care about burning this bridge, though.
Well, no, because I think the showcase is kind of stupid, because the host likes to pick whoever he wants to be the winner. So I don't feel like I would have had much of a chance unless if I was a kiss ass.
It's nepotism, gotcha. So it's just whoever sucks his dick the most.
That's what I feel, and I feel like he's. I mean, I don't want to talk shit about him. I think he's a nice guy, but I feel like if you, as a person, kind of like say anything bad about him, I think that he turns it into like, it's war, you're a piece of shit, I never want to talk to you again.
So he's a little oversensitive. Gotcha. And it is my suburban thing. But it just seems like without the letter, it's hard for the word to go around because the suburban scene, nobody fucking, I never hear any drama from there.
I've heard a little bit. I've heard one time a comic made a joke, like a slavery joke, and there was to a black comic, and the black comic posted it in the suburban comedy scene, the whole entire conversation saying, he was upset, this, that, and the third, he shouldn't talk shit like that. Mm-hmm. But everyone knew it was just a joke.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess there's always going to be drama. It's just that it's more spread out. And I'm not in any of the Facebook groups for the suburban scene. I'm from the suburbs, but I never perform there unless very specifically rare situations for if it's a show, not for open mics.
Yeah.
So fuck the suburban
I'll go
scene.
to I try to go to some of them. Some of them are really nice open mics. Like the one at CG's Comedy Club, that one's really, really nice.
Yeah, I heard about that one.
Yeah, that one's pretty good.
Well, I'm just shitting on the scene. Yeah, I'm sure there's some great open mics, but every comedy scene deserves to be criticized harshly, I believe, in my opinion. But anyway,
I feel like the only issue is I definitely think that the comedy scene in Chicago is a lot harder and tougher, and I think it builds people to do better.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot of suburban comics where if they just do suburban comedy and then they go to the Chicago, they just eat dog shit.
Yeah, dude. Chicago is where you find out. Also, it could be so, shitty sometimes. If you're just... Chicago has its own problems. It can be kind of defeating because it's, it's so... everyone's so fucking jealous and into their own heads that they might not laugh even if you are funny.
Yeah.
So it's, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. I totally agree, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's a good point. It is. You take it. You don't seem like you are too bitter yet about comedy.
I mean, I say what I want. I'm not going to. There might be some instances where I won't be completely honest with someone because I don't want to offend their feelings. But at the same time, I like being honest. The issue is that I feel like a lot of people can't handle that.
Hell yeah, dude. And you're disciplined, it seems. So I respect you.
Oh, well, thank you,
especially
Tim.
for putting it out. Yeah. What's up?
By the way, I like your haircut. You look cute.
Yeah, dude, I look much more conservative, not like a hippie or whatever. I don't know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool, man. Well, I guess I'll let you go. I think that covers everything unless you wanted to throw out.
Pretty much. Well, we're still trying to find this guy. We have no idea who he is.
Oh, the letter writer.
This comedy tattletale guy. I don't.
Well, we're not
once I find out who he is, I'm gonna make fun of him all the time.
I mean, we're not trying to dox him on this show, but we are definitely gonna, we're definitely making fun of them. It's definitely a dude.
Yeah, it has to be.
It's a dude.
I've been talking to the people that have also been on that letter, and I mean, we have some people that we think are it, but this person just seems like really, really secluded.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't talk to a lot of people. They don't have a lot of friends in the scene.
I mean, yeah, clearly, no one who writes a letter has friends in any scene. So, so for some, so for internet scenes. But yeah, anyway, anything you need to plug?
The only thing I have to plug is that my Instagram is Trevor Cookie.
All right.
And that I do have a comedy show coming up. I'm gonna do the guest spot for Burnt Barbecue comedy show on the 28th of December at the Kidsy Inn.
Well, there you go. Thanks for plugging that.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for calling it. Thanks for letting me call you.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, Tim.
Absolutely, dude. All right. Have a good one.
All right.
Peace.
Have a good one.
I don't know how to hang up. There we go. All right. That was the show. We had 2 callers. We went for over an hour and a half, dude. That's enough for this shit. Let's go back to the theme tune.